You and I actually saw this one, but you wrote the review. It's Attica.
No, I think you wrote the review of that one, actually.
Yeah, another documentary. And similar to The Rescue, it's like, yeah, we know the basic outline of what happened, the Attica prison riots. But this dives really deep. And to me, the most interesting part about it was the negotiation period, the 4 days in which there was a relative peace going on and trying to figure out what's happening. What are your thoughts on Attica?
Yeah, well, let's just set it up for people that this is about 50 years ago. I think it was 1971. And
this is 50 years ago.
Yeah.
All right.
And then, of course, there's this, so the prisoners rioted at Attica, and they basically took control of one of the cell blocks, and they were all out in the yard. And so for 4 or 5 days, they had control of this.
And they had hostages.
And they had hostages. That's right. Because if they didn't have hostages, it would have been over in, an hour or two, So, and the hostages were the prison guards. And I think there were around a dozen hostages, something like that. I can't quite remember. But, and then, hundreds of prisoners. And it became this whole international thing because, this is kind of unprecedented in the United States, prisoners taking control of part of a prison.
And then also the fact that the media coverage at that time, they were covering it, and they were invited in by the inmates to document everything that was going on.
Exactly right. Yeah. So they wanted to make sure that, the world saw, and their demands were, basically we want to be treated more humanely, like we are treated like animals here. The food was produced on, like 20 cents a meal or something and whatever. And I mean, they were having terrible food. They just had, so little of any of the basic human decency. And of course, prison guards abused them and did all kinds of things. And so for the most part, their demands were just, they weren't like, oh, take time off of our sentences. It was like, just very human things. Mm-hmm. But because of politics at the time, well, let me back up and say, yes, the negotiators that came in, they tried negotiating with the person in charge of the prison system. That did not go well. He was lying to them, and they brought in a sort of team of mediators. And I mean, I guess I won't spoil what happens, but things went. I mean, I know it's a spoiler for something that happened years ago, but
50 years ago, yeah.
You don't know. So if you go in not knowing, there is a sort of tension that is interesting the way that it's sort of built into the movie. I guess what I will say is, it's referenced also in Dog Day Afternoon that happened like the next year or something. Mm-hmm. This sort of bank heist, and so that is very much in the consciousness of the U.S. and New York in particular. And then it comes up in another movie I'll talk about in a second. But I guess what maybe we should say about it is that the police were very much of the attitude of, I want to go in there and just shoot a bunch of people. And that race, the majority of the prisoners were black. Almost all of the police were white. And
no, they were all white, not almost.
Yeah.
They were,
and there's footage that's shown in the movie of police saying white power, And so, I mean, this is incredibly relevant to today. And it's one of those things that also politics gets involved. Nixon even ends up getting involved at the time. So all of this is totally relevant to today. And let me just say, things did not turn out great in that situation. And it was a complete failure of this sort of macho police attitude of, let's just go in and shoot people. And
yeah. I mean, the thing that struck me was that, for one thing, what we know of Attica, I think today when people do think of Attica, they think of Dog Day Afternoon. I was very young when this happened, and so I barely knew anything about it, but I knew of it. And like I said, I think we know the beginning and the end of it. And to me, the I said it before, but the truly interesting part was what was happening in there and the reasons why. And then also made me think, as bad as things are today, we got to remember how bad it was back in the 70s. This civil rights had been passed, but the white race, the white Americans at this point were still fairly emboldened and, held on to their, majority privilege. So to
yeah,
speak.
I mean, Martin Luther King had just been killed in 1968. Bobby Kennedy had been killed. Malcolm X had been killed. I mean, this was, and so we're talking 3 years after this kind of stuff, and so, I mean, nerves were absolutely raw, and people were, I mean, it was this feeling, you feel like by the white people, like loss of control. So now we're going to show you, that this whole kind of thing, very important to see captured in contemporaneous footage at the time. And then to hear some of the survivors tell in their stories, that was the fascinating part to me too. Some of these prisoners who, now are out and talking about their whole experiences in there. And people who help negotiate and things like that. So really, and it's important because it did lead to some prison reforms, and we're still not there yet in terms of like people treating people as humanely as they deserve to be treated. But boy, it was rough.
I mean, the brutality at the end is just. It's cringeworthy, and then all the prosecutions of the correctional officers that never happened.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they basically just got away with, almost certainly murder. And I mean, like, not just like, accidental, but like trying to teach.
No, it was, there's nothing accidental about it.
No, it was brutal and terrible. And I'm hoping this documentary will raise more consciousness about what went on then. Because I mean, this gets right into conversations today about, structural racism and critical race theory and all these kinds of things. I mean, if you don't think that there's structural racism in certain parts of the U.S., then you need to watch this documentary.
This is New York. This is New York State, for crying out loud.
Yeah, so. Exactly. This is not, some out of the way prison in Louisiana or something like that. So it's a real eye opener. And it, I was going to say that this makes a good double bill with another doc I saw there. It was called Hold Your Fire. And it's about the beginnings of hostage negotiations and starting to use that in these kinds of standoffs, because it went so horribly wrong in Attica. There was a Hold Your Fire is just briefly about a attempted robbery of a sporting goods store to get guns. It was 4 black men, and they ended up in a standoff. They weren't trying to take hostages, but as they were trying to leave, the police found them and surrounded the building, and so they ended up with the hostages that were in there. And then they didn't trust the police because of Attica, because they had seen what happened there, so they were too scared to come out. And then so there's with the survivors of that incident, they have modern day interviews, and the people, 2 of the guys that committed the crimes were still alive and absolutely remorseful and so on. But the real story is about one of the police detectives who had a degree in psychology and started trying to convince people we need to negotiate with people inside when the police just wanted to run in and start killing people. So you do see that there's some lessons learned from Attica. Although, and then they started building from there. And today, hostage negotiation is a thing, but where did it come from? That's basically what Hold Your Fire is about. Also, very compelling, very human documentary. Great double bill. And in fact, if you could make it a triple bill and just put Dog Day Afternoon right in the middle, because that's sort of the sequence of events.
I think it's a testament to, just having the media out there, the news, to be able to cover this stuff live and keep authority accountable in these highly tense situations. And even with the going all the way up to Rodney King, and not much had changed up until that point. You had all this footage.
Yeah, speaking of accountability, I mean, that's one of the things that definitely comes up in Hold Your Fire is the crowd had formed outside of this hostage situation, and we're really turning on the police, even though there's people in there that have people hostage, and people are mad at the police. I mean, that tells you that how messed up the police have to be, and how public opinion has to turn against them. You get that sense in Dog Day Afternoon as well, of course.
Yeah.
So it's that public accountability that today we're still seeing. That has to be there. Sadly.
All right. Let's move on. Let's